Welcome to the podcast, Wait, What Do You Do Again? Where we talk to everyday people doing amazing things. I'm your host, Megan DeFord. Let's go. Today we are joined by Ashley Oppon, a death midwife and nurse at Sankofa Healing Sanctuary. Today we talk about all aspects of death, including the physiological changes that happen and the cultural responses to death. Enjoy. Ashley, thank you so much for being here today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Can you tell us what you do?
Sure. So I am a registered nurse and then also a death doula or death midwife, people call it also. I do some other spiritual things, but I really concentrate a lot in the area of death work and helping people through the grief process and explaining the death process actually in general.
So when I first came upon your bio, I was so intrigued, A, because I don't think that we talk about death really as a whole. It's like, at least in
Mhm.
US society, that's really the only society I've lived in. Um, when I saw that you were a death midwife and a death doula, I had only known about that from the beginning, from the birth experience. Can you explain what that is and how you came to this role that you're in?
Sure. So a death doula or a death midwife, some people have different definitions of those two. I just say death midwife a lot, but it is basically like a birth doula except for death. So it can go in a lot of different directions. So you can start basically doing work, which I've done a lot of actually, is introducing advanced directives to people. So if anybody doesn't know what advanced directive is, it's telling people what they would want in the case that they no longer can make a decision. So if somebody is unconscious or they're in a life-threatening situation, it's documented what actions they want to either preserve their life or not. I have found that even at that stage, going over that with people, a lot of people don't know what they can ask for and what they can't ask for. And you can be very specific in that aspect. I want medication, but I don't want a ventilator. I want CPR, but if the CPR doesn't work, I don't want anything else. People can make those types of decisions. So that's even like I would say at the beginning of death work, explaining that to people and walking them through how they can fill out this type of paperwork and things like that. Then you can go into actually working with somebody who's actually dying, whether they know they're going to die, they're terminally ill, or they have decided to do medical aid in dying and explaining that kind of process to them and how that works. To going to even doing some doulas do vigils. I don't do vigils, but I respect people who do vigils so much. So that can be working with somebody when they're actively dying, making sure that, and usually the death doula has had the conversation before, what the person wants, whether it's certain kinds of music, certain types of smells, and going into even who they want around, who they don't want around, and the atmosphere and everything like that. And then going to helping families to do home funerals if they choose to want to do a home funeral, which is completely legal in every state. And then also going into dealing with funeral homes and funeral directors and making sure people get the funeral that they want, whether they want a religious ceremony or not religious ceremony. That happens a lot. Making sure that they want to be honored the way that they want it to be honored. So it goes all through all aspects of the process of dying. Death doulas do a multitude of things. They also can do like projects for people. Sometimes people are dying, they want to do like a memorial kind of project, maybe making photo albums, maybe writing letters to family members, creating different types of art. And then also death cleaning is even an area of death midwifery. So they can go to people's houses and help them clean them out, go through their things with them. So it's so interesting because it's so many like death care seems very standard. Like it's like, well, someone's dying. But like there's so much to dying. Like
Yeah.
that yeah, I think a lot of people don't think about because they don't want to, understandably, I
Right.
get that. But yeah.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's the thing with like as I was thinking about our conversation today and thinking about, my relationship with death and my understanding of it, even when I said growing up Catholic, everything about death was about the afterlife. It wasn't
Yeah.
actually anything about what you're talking about, like the nuts and bolts of
Mhm.
death, which is something we all go through. And so two things.
Mhm.
How how did you come to this work? And then also, how do people find you? Like how do people seek you out for this? Because it seems like this role is so impactful and the work that you're doing is really beautiful. Um, just how do people find you to help out?
Yeah. So, um, well, I'll see the way people find me first. Sometimes people they're looking for somebody to explain things to them or help them do things, and sometimes their family isn't the best people to do it because you always think in a situation where somebody's dying or wants to talk about their death, if they have loved ones, a lot of the time the loved ones obviously don't want to talk about that. That, which is totally understandable. So having like a third party to help them with these things is really helpful. It's actually it's not a new profession, but it's definitely something that is new to people now. It's coming forward and people are kind of starting to seek them out because they've heard of it. But it's an ancient thing. People, this has been going on for years and years and years. It's just never had like a, a label. So people kind of find me through other people a lot of the time. Like, oh, I heard you help someone else. I heard you help somebody do that. That's kind of how it's been happening lately. And people like most of the time people talk to me, they're like, I've never heard of this. So it's totally fine. And a lot of my job in that aspect is teaching, a lot of education about like what I do and how I do it. How I got into this was I always tell this story. So from when I was a young person, I went to funerals sometimes with my dad. My dad is from Ghana in Western Africa, and our funerals are usually traditionally like a 7 day process. In the United States, a lot of times we kind of condense it, but it was always a very up and down thing. There's days of grieving and there's days of fun. And it's always kind of, to me, when I looked at funerals, I was like, okay, this is like a celebration, but obviously we're very sad this person has died. And I have to say, this is usually for older people. For children and young people, it's very different. But when people are older, it's a celebration and it's grieving at the same time. So growing up seeing the way that in my culture that we grieve, which is like a celebration and then also like very immense crying and like throwing ourselves on graves and things. I always thought that was like kind of normal because to me it made sense. I was like, okay, yeah, you are happy, especially because from a spiritual aspect, everybody will be like, oh, well, this person is with God. This person is in a better place. So this is a good thing, even though we are going to miss them. So I always kind of thought that way. My dad, I remember when I was 4, I was all of a sudden one day became very scared to die. Like one day I was like, I don't want to die. This sounds awful. And my dad always was like, yeah, but like you're going to be in a better place and everything's going to be fine. So don't worry about it. And I don't know why the way he said it that day, I was like, okay. I was like, I guess it's actually fine.
Yeah.
I was like, all right. So, then I got older and I went to my first American funeral when I was, I believe, 16 years old. It was a choir teacher at my school and everybody was very like quiet and I was very confused to be perfectly honest. I was like, why is everyone like keeping all their like so quiet and like not talking and like I'm used to like very large outpourings of grief. So I was just like, this is very odd to me. And then I started kind of realizing that in American, I'll say American, I don't know if it's all the West, but American culture, that death is a thing that like we just have to like we have to grieve it a little bit and then like get over it. And I was like, oh, I don't know about that. I was like, I feel like this isn't
Right.
healthy. Yeah. I
Yeah.
was like, and then when I got a little older, I went to not my culture, but a different West African culture with a couple of my friends of somebody who at our job who had passed away.
Mhm.
And it was very much like my culture. There was a lot of like grieving. The mother threw herself on the grave while they were putting it down. And to my friends, they were like, that is crazy. That is wild. And I was like, no, guys, this is normal. Like this is just, and it was a mother, it was her son who had passed away. The guy was in his like late 20s. So I was like, no, 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 this is like completely normal. And to me, this was just this woman showing everybody like, this is my sadness. Like, this is how much I am sad. And everybody was so shocked except for her family, understanding like this is like the worst thing that's ever happened to this woman. So like,
Yeah.
yes, for her to throw herself on a grave because her son died, I think is understandable. So I've had all these different experiences with death. So then I became a nurse and I have done a bunch of different things and I worked hospice at one point. And when I worked hospice, I realized that we really aren't talking about death the way we should. And I also realized that like talking about death gives you more of a zest, I guess, for life and gives you more appreciation. Because when you know, and not like you everybody has to live like this every day, but when you know like you are going to die, there are people in your life who you love who will not be here one day. And when you know that, there's so many things that are no longer important. Like there's so many things that like do not matter and like we're going to just move forward from this because like what is the point of me arguing with about stupid little stuff when like one day you won't be here to argue with me. You know what I mean?
Right.
Once I started doing that, I was like, wow, this is like, it really changed my perspective on life. Like, I was seeing these people every day and talking to them about like what they wanted and what they thought was going to happen, and them asking me questions about what do you think is going to happen to me and how is this going to play out? And medically, I know, and I would explain to them. Sometimes they'd ask spiritual questions, and I always kind of go with them on like what they think, but you know, even people don't even understand like the medical process of dying and how that is. And I also worked in a hospital too, and seeing people get resuscitated is also it's an extreme process. And a lot of people, we used to have people, parents especially, they're in their 80s, they're in their 90s. I even had one time a lady was 102 and her family was like, do everything, do everything. And the doctors were like, okay, like, but I'm just telling you, like, and at one point, this is just a story that happened. We
Mhm.
had to give this lady, she was 102, CPR. We were giving this lady CPR for almost 45 minutes, which is a long time.
Mhm.
And at one point, the doctor got frustrated and he said, let the family come in here because it's a mess, honestly. And it's traumatic. And like, obviously, nobody wants to traumatize the family, but they were just like, keep going, keep going. And it's like, we're traumatizing your loved one and you don't realize it. So, like, because you're so afraid of this person not being here, you're allowing for all this to happen. Like, this isn't great. And again, I'm not trying to discount anybody's love for their person, but
Mhm.
at the same time, we sometimes have to realize that like we cause more trauma emotionally and physically to somebody when we are unable to let go and start our own grieving process. Um, so the way I came to it was by seeing all of these things. And even working as a hospice nurse, I really enjoyed that job a lot. But I also was like, I want to do something kind of more holistic.
Mhm.
I want to be more a part of somebody's journey through death more holistically. And then I learned all about death doulas and death midwives. And then I did some training on that. And that's how I got to where I am today.
Wow. Like
Hmm.
one of the things that you were saying about the funeral for your choir teacher and how it was quiet, we even use phrases like, oh, they're so strong, like,
Yeah.
and it's interesting. And I don't know how we got to that point. Like what you're saying about a mother throwing herself on a grave. And
Mhm.
I have two kids, and I don't know how parents live through it. Like I
Mhm.
don't. That again, like you said, yeah, that does seem normal. Like that's
Yeah,
awful, right? And even if you believe that that person is in a better place, they're not with you, right? And it's a
exactly.
part of you.
Hmm.
So that's interesting. And then, and I don't know if it's because of, I don't know if it's just the world we live in, but like we don't experience death. Like I was even thinking about it again and going into this conversation. I've only seen two people die, and it
Hmm.
was in a hospital, and it was medicated, and it was as clean as I imagine it could be, right? It seemed very
Hmm.
normal and natural. And our culture, we don't live in intergenerational homes. And we don't, even you, I would love to hear more about a home funeral. Like death just feels like this other thing. So while I understand why families do say like do anything to keep them around, can you talk a little bit more about what
Yes.
is the process of dying? I mean, I think all like we kind of just see it in a movie, and it's
Yeah.
and that's the experience, right? Like what is physically happening? And maybe we can take the case that you were just talking about with CPR and resuscitation. Like what is happening to us at that time? And is it your brain that is going, or just from a medical perspective?
Absolutely. Yes. So a couple different things. So when somebody is so emergencies are a little different. So if somebody's in cardiac arrest, it's because your heart has either stopped or it's not stopped pumping properly. So the blood is not going where it's supposed to go, partially to your brain, which is stopping everything. You can't breathe because your oxygen, your blood that has oxygen in it is not going to the right places. So that's part of it. So emergencies are a little different. But if somebody's dying of a say cancer, um, the process happens usually similarly to the same way for many people who are slowly kind of dying. Not slowly, but they have something that it's imminent. We know they're going to die from this. So usually people stop being hungry. That's one of the first things. People don't really want to eat. And because almost every culture in the world, the way we show that we love each other is by cooking and feeding, which
Right.
is beautiful. People love to say, "Oh my God, they're not eating. What are we gonna do?" Da 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 da. It's okay because sometimes at that point, eating becomes painful.
Hmm.
They don't want it. It hurts their bodies to ingest food.
Hmm.
So it's okay to not let your loved one eat when they're at that point. Then when like the dying process starts, usually the hypothalamus, which is the back of your head, is what controls all your autonomic function. So breathing, your heartbeat, all that kind of stuff. Also your temperature. So people start to always feel like they're cold. That's something
Hmm.
that's really, really common. Also because your body is trying to kind of keep your blood in where it needs to be. It doesn't send as much blood to the ends of your body. So like your fingers and your toes and things like that. So people will complain about being cold. Um, then as it like progresses, now this is when death is like really imminent, but a couple days maybe, people stop eliminating like urine, bowel movements, that kind of starts to stop. Um, People become either very sleepy, they might be sleepy all the time, and then have moments of being very lucid or trying to get up and feeling very agitated. That happens really commonly. And then when the process keeps going, their breathing changes. So some people unfortunately call it the death rattle, or but
Hmm.
it's really called Cheyne-Stokes breathing. It's almost like kind of a gurgling, and a lot
Hmm.
of the time it's because there's fluid that's building up in the body. Um, and that is, and I'll mention this because I think it's really important, is why people get morphine. When I worked hospice, people always said this to me. Oh, if they get morphine, they're gonna die. That's not how that works. Morphine is something we give people to calm their breathing down, like to make it more relaxed because they're actually uncomfortable with the gurgling and all that kind of stuff. So when we give somebody morphine, or a hospice nurse gives someone morphine or prescribes it, it's just to relax them so that their body doesn't have to work as hard to breathe and that they can be calm. It will not You cannot just give somebody more morphine that will kill them. We're not allowed to do that.
Right.
People
Right.
would literally think that like that's what I was doing. I was like, I'm literally that's illegal. I can't, I can't do that.
Right.
So yeah, so we do that. And then we always tell people too when somebody is dying, they can hear. So it's okay to keep talking to them. They may not respond, but talking to them is always good. And another really interesting thing that happens a lot of the time when people are dying, if they're waiting for people, they could have all of their vital signs that a nurse or doctor might take, their blood pressure, their temperature. It could all be wrong. It could all be bad. And we would be like, how is this person living with this terribly high temperature or this very low blood pressure? And when their loved one who they were waiting for to come comes, they will die within
Wow.
sometimes minutes or hours. It's very, very interesting. It happens a lot. Your vital signs start going crazy, and the person's usually at that point not really conscious, and they then stop breathing.
Mhm.
And when people know somebody is dying, I would say the best thing to do is talk to them and say anything you want to say. Just say it. They can hear you, even though they can't respond. And then there have been studies about people who have been unconscious and come out of that, and they do hear.
Mhm.
So we know that they can hear everything that you're saying. And the biggest thing to do when somebody is dying is to just comfort them, you know?
You mentioned morphine and how there's this misconception about it. What are some of the other things that you have seen that we sort of get wrong about death?
Well, this isn't even just staff, but I know when I was working in hospice, like we have patients who, like, I had this guy, he was very old and his family was very nice, but they were like, oh, he's diabetic and he really wants a beer. I was like, okay, just give him a beer. Like, it's gonna be fine. They're
Yeah.
like, yeah, but he's diabetic. I was like, yeah, but it really doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah.
Like, let's let this guy live. Like, he wants a Heineken, just get the man a Heineken.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think one thing people get wrong about death is that like it can't be like when people talk about it, I don't think they're necessarily just being morbid. Like everybody's just like, oh, that's just people or this person's morbid. No, no. I think they just understand the reality that this is something that's going to happen. Um, I think people get grief wrong a lot because there's no good way to grieve. There's just no good way. I also volunteer at a organization called Good Grief here in New Jersey, and we deal with grieving families. So we have children who have lost parents or siblings, parents who have lost children or partners, and we even have a group for caregivers, people who have lost their kids and now they're taking care of grandkids or nieces, nephews, that kind of situation. And they talk about grief a lot and the things people say to them that can be really messed up. Especially, okay, like even in the situation of a miscarriage, there's a woman who's had a miscarriage to say something like, well, you can always get pregnant again. Okay, yeah, but that's not the point. Like I
Right.
can, yeah, I'm still grieving this baby that I thought was gonna have a whole life and we were gonna have all these experiences, and that's fine.
Right.
Um, People automatically, and like I talked about spirituality before, or like me even being comforting my own father, it's different, but like automatically talking about spirituality, like you said, kind of
Mhm.
saying like, oh, well, they're in a better place. It's like, okay, like you said, but they're not here. And I
Right.
miss that. And that's totally valid and fine. And we'll see. I actually facilitate a group of for child loss, so people who've lost their kids, and we have a lot of parents who are they're all wonderful people, but they'll say things like, "I had a day when I was happy." And I felt terrible about it. Like I can't be ever happy again. And the thing is, like, no, grief goes in ebbs and flows. Some days you might be happy just because life is happening around you. Um, and some days you will be terribly sad, and that's okay. Grief is what it is, and it's over when it's never over. Um, that's another misconception I'm gonna put.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And even just you talking, we're very dismissive. Like
yeah,
even what I said about like, oh, they're so strong, that's being dismissive. Like, oh,
yeah,
the good news is you can get pregnant. That's dismissive. And
yeah,
I think it's like you said, it's not morbid. We just don't like to sit with feelings that aren't just happy, right?
yeah,
So
exactly.
Yeah. So talk a little bit more about that. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, it's fine. Yeah, no, it's so true. Also, I saw this wonderful thing that we always do presentations in our Good Grief organization about. They talk about like your grief never decreases. So they showed like a little ball, and the
Mhm.
ball never gets smaller. It's just that life is a bigger ball that grows around it. So like you don't, your
Yeah.
grief doesn't go away. You just start experiencing other things
Right.
and joy, and all these other things come into your life that your grief is still there, but it's okay. So people used to be like, oh, they'll get over it. Or even if it's a parent, that I've seen that a lot. I know people who their parents passed away. And okay, yeah, your parent maybe was in their late 60s or 70s, so they weren't that elderly. But at the same time, you may feel like, oh, I'm a 40-year-old orphan. Yeah, you may feel like that, and that's totally fine and valid. Like, and nobody can be like, well, your mom was old or not in good health. It doesn't matter.
Right.
Like, yeah, you're not gonna miss this person less because they like were unhealthy. Like, that's insane. Like,
Right.
yeah, but as a society, we're so like we have, like you said, it's so hard for us to deal with feelings that aren't just like of joy, and
Mhm.
we're always just like, yeah, it's gonna be fine, it's gonna be fine, let's push it aside. No, just sit with it. And also, you don't the best thing to do for people, I think, who are grieving is just ask them what they want. Do you want me to be here? Do you want It's the same thing for new moms, I think. And
Right.
it's so similar. I think the whole doula thing, birth and death, it's a lot more like than we think. They're two very overwhelming situations, and nobody knows how to help that person. So what we do is just say, "Hey, what do you want? Like, do you want me
Yeah.
to? Yeah, do you want me to stay? Do you want me to leave? Do you need a dinner cook because you're not in the mood? Do you want me to take you out for ice cream and tell you the gossip of the day instead of talking about this today? Do you want?" And oh, another thing, we don't have to stop talking about the person who died. Like,
Yes.
yeah, I know.
Yes. And
I
this is something that as I have gotten older and have had friends who have lost loved ones and especially parents,
Mhm.
I now make a point of saying, I will love talking about your mom or your dad.
Yeah,
Anytime you want to talk about it, I'd love to hear that. Because
yeah,
I think, again, we don't know what to say. And I'm like, I don't need to say anything. I just need you to know that I'm here. Right. So, but it feels, the first time I did it, it felt weird. Like
yeah,
it just
yeah.
did. Right. I felt like I was almost infringing, but I was like, to your point, I see that to my friends about their babies. I'm like, tell me everything, right? Like, tell me how they spit up or whatever. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so we don't have to
Exactly.
stop talking about them.
Exactly. And that's one thing I found too in my group of child loss especially, is everybody around our parents would be like, their friends, their family would be like, "Ooh, we don't want to make that person upset." And a lot of our parents would be like, "You know what? I want to talk about my kid. Just because they're not here doesn't mean I didn't spend a whole lifetime taking care of my kid." And talking about how great they are and what they liked and what they didn't like and the things they did that annoyed me and the things that they did that made me laugh. Like, and we can do the same thing for all the people we love in our life. And talking about them makes I always think of my own mom. My mom's mom died when she was 10. We still talk about my grandmother sometimes. My mom has 10 years of memories that are never going to go away. So
Yeah,
like, and sometimes she's just like, yeah, my mom did this or my mom said that. And why not? And then my mom might cry about it, but it doesn't mean that we can't talk about it. It doesn't mean it's not good for her to talk about it. You know what I mean? To remember, oh yeah, I remember when this happened. I remember when she said this and when she did this. I think it's so healthy, but we're all just so afraid of making people upset
right.
that like, yeah, like, oh, but they're gonna cry. Like, but since when is crying and sadness necessarily bad emotions? Or
Exactly.
and a lot of the time when people cry because they're talking about this, it's because they're remembering how much they love that person. I don't think remembering love is ever bad, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think even in this short time that we've been talking, I've realized my naivete about death. And I'm like, death is really complicated. It's not just like old people dying or sudden death or, like it's complex. There's not one type of death. And even though
Yes.
the body stops functioning, like that is a common denominator, like there are different types.
Hmm.
And even with love, like love is so complex and grief is part of
Yes.
love. So I love that. what you were saying about your mom talking about her mother, and
Mhm.
it's part of her. Her mother is always part of her, you know? So why would we deny that? That's a really beautiful thing. And I like talking about it and asking people what they need. If people don't know what they need, what advice would you give for loved ones around that person if they're like, I don't even know?
Mhm.
What is something that you've seen that's really kind of been helpful?
Literally just being there, just being in the presence of the person, or being like, hey, listen, if you need to call me, call me. Or just checking up on them once in a while. Hey, how you doing? You need anything? Or like, you want to talk? You don't have to pester the person or feel like you need to, but to just be like, hey, when you need me, I'm here. And then checking up on them. Hey, how have you been? I haven't heard from you in a couple days or a week. How are you doing? I think is the most important thing. Just checking in on people and not forgetting them, and realizing that it doesn't, like, their grief is not going to stop like on the appropriate 40 days or whatever your tradition says. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not done now. It's not over. They're still going to be thinking about it. They're still going to be going through it. And oh, and also you talked about complicated grief real quick. It reminded me of, like, also even in situations of especially addiction, people have loved ones who are addicted. That can be extremely complicated, their feelings towards it, because sometimes there's feelings of relief. Sometimes there's feelings of, and then guilt comes with that. Like, I feel bad that I'm actually happy that this person isn't in this tortured state that they were in. Like, so it gets really complicated. And I think uh, issues of people who have died by suicide, things like that. Or people who were medically complex when they were born and then they died from something like that. It's so complicated, and people, I think the best way to just blanket is, what do you need? Are you okay? And checking in, because a lot of people want to put their 2 cents in. Just don't put your 2 cents. Keep it to yourself. Like, keep your
Keep the
money.
pennies.
And and just being there is always the best thing. Like, and people, yeah, and just never feeling like you can never bring that person up ever again. You can anytime they want to talk about it or they bring it up. You don't have to change the subject. You can just be like, oh yeah, I remember when he did that or she did that or they did that, whatever.
You mentioned a home funeral.
Mhm.
Can you talk to us a little bit more about what you've experienced and what that is?
Yeah, I have not gotten the pleasure to do a home funeral yet, but people are allowed to have funerals in their house. There, before, I believe it was like the 1930s, almost all funerals were done in the house. And you talked about this earlier, talking about like we don't know when we kind of got disconnected from it. It was kind of around that time in the United States, at least, that people started opening funeral homes instead. And most before that was always people having funerals in their house. It was completely normal. And it was a community thing. So, there was somebody who would help you, and and it was also because those people were usually dying in the home anyway. So they were already there. So they would clean them up to the best of their ability. And this is not to be too TMI about it, but for a body to break down, it takes a lot longer than we think. People
Okay.
think it's like day one. It's
Yeah.
like, oh God, get rid of it. Like, no. Yeah, like something's gonna happen. Like, nothing is gonna happen. It takes a couple days, and there's ways to preserve even in the home for a few days.
Mhm.
Usually, I think certain states have certain laws on how long can be. I think in New Jersey it's like 2 days, but either way, you can, most states you can work with a funeral home who will transport the body to the house if you need to. And there are certain religions where they have customs, religions and different cultures where they have customs where it is they want the body to be in the home, or there's supposed to be a special sort of night vigil with the body. So people need the body to stay home. In that case, the family then just takes care of the body by preserving it, whether it's with ice, keeping the home cool, and then doing whatever funeral practices that they do, and then they can bury the body after that.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, but it's something that's completely legal, something that people do. And some people want to die at home. They don't want to, and they want to be surrounded by their family.
Hmm.
We also have this culture where we're very afraid of bodies. We think that something is like, I don't know, gonna pop out. Like,
Right.
yeah,
Too many zombie movies or something. I don't
yeah,
know. Yeah.
yeah. And for the most part, unless there was like a communicable disease, everybody's gonna be all right. And actually, there have been a lot of studies and things done where they talk about people are always so worried with children, especially. Oh no, the children, they're going to see and they're going to be traumatized. They actually say that it actually helps children process to see, like, okay, this person, and we, especially like at the organization I volunteer at, we try not to use any euphemisms. We try to
Mhm.
always say, this person has died. This person is not coming back to life. They are no longer breathing because when you say certain things to children, oh, this person is sleeping.
Hmm.
Everybody sleeps, you know, so now they're like, wait a minute, I sleep. Oh my
Right.
God. Yeah.
Right. Right.
So, yeah, it's really important for kids too to be able to see that this is what has happened and now this is the end, and they can begin their grieving process in like a really healthy way, understanding what has actually happened.
Hmm.
um yeah, so home funerals are actually really good for families. And also when somebody passes away, when somebody dies, to be able to take care of them, their self is just an outpouring showing of love. You know, you can comb their hair, you can make them look the way, you know, that you feel that they always look, the way that they wanted to look, wear the clothes that they want, and you're taking care of them because that's your last act of love towards that person.
Hmm.
So it can be a really beautiful and like a good way to keep going on your healing journey, and like something that happens that you're like, okay, this is something that I'm going to take with me and I'll remember how I cared for this person.
Hmm. I wonder if part of our reticence seeing the body is because, and I have very, very limited experience with this, but you know when someone's dead, like whether you're spiritual or not, something
Mhm.
has happened, like
Yeah.
something has changed. It's
Yes.
not someone sleeping, right? It's not someone
No.
really, really
Yes.
sick. And for adults, I would imagine we take that, we internalize that. It's like, well, we understand that could be us, but kids, it actually
Hmm.
probably is really helpful. They're not necessarily seeing it in the way that it's like impacting adults, but
Yeah.
it's very visible. It's, like, oh, this is different than going to sleep. They are
Yeah.
not here. Like,
Yes.
so I wonder if that's part of why we're sort of like, ugh, uncomfortable. I shouldn't say ugh, but like uncomfortable being
Yeah.
in different
Yeah.
bodies. Do you see like spiritually either what do you think is happening, or do you see something, a commonality in different faiths of sort of language that we use about it? Even like I always say, like they've passed on, right? Like
Hmm.
I don't know where they're
Yeah.
passing to, but um, like what are your thoughts sort of there about what's happening, or in certain religions that you see commonalities of how we talk about death?
Yeah. When I have been around people who have died in my presence, there is, like you said, it's different, but it also feels like something has been sucked out of the room. I always describe it like that. It's a silence that is different than regular silence. So when you see it and when it's there, it's like now, and I don't even think you necessarily have to be a spiritual person to feel this way. I think you can look at it and see this is hollow. This is an empty thing now. This is just flesh. So there's literally no life in this person or soul or whatever you like to call it. Um, and I see in a lot of customs, people open windows, people open doors. Yeah. Oh, we have to let this soul out. And it reminds me actually of my fiance and when his father died, and he literally told me this. He said his father was a very spiritual person in their tradition. Um, he said there was a wind that left the room. Like
Yeah.
he said, there was a wind in the room, and I opened the window and it went out. Like, and he felt that was his father who was
Yeah.
leaving. So, and that happens all over the world. People say that, like, this is a tradition they do, opening windows, opening doors, um, making sure you sweep the right way so the soul knows which way to leave. And
Hmm.
That's a very, very common thing. And people talk about that a lot. And people always say, like, okay, I can feel this person is not here anymore. I
Hmm.
just feel it in the room. And I always find that fascinating because, like, we all know, you know, sometimes people know before they know. They'll walk into the room and say, there's this person. They won't even see them yet. They'll just know, oh,
Yeah.
they're not here. You know, they don't feel that person's presence anymore. I think it's fascinating when people say that.
That's interesting. That whole like your that connection and feeling to life, right?
Hmm.
Or energy or whatever you want to call it. So
Yeah.
how has your relationship to death changed especially as your experience has grown in this work that you do?
It's so interesting because people, I talk about this stuff all the time. I like to talk about it because I think it's interesting. And then people will say to me like, "Well, you don't have somebody who like your parent. My parents have not passed away yet, or like my close family." Yes, it's true. It doesn't mean, and people are like, well, how are you gonna handle that? Like people talk to me kind of like, like, what are you gonna do? It's like, well, it
Rude.
doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. First of all, it doesn't mean I'm not gonna be sad just because I understand that death is a part of life. We can all, the two things can be true at the same time. It's not like, oh, well, I talk about death and I think that it's okay to grieve, so I'm never gonna be sad. Of course I'm sad. I always say this lately, like my sister got a dog. I've never been a dog person. And now I'm obsessed with this dog. I buy her stuff. Like I love talking to her. I tell her she's my best dog friend. Like she's a dog. She can't talk back. But but the
She
other
knows.
day, yeah, I know she knows. I was like in the shower thinking like when her name is Pink. I'm like when Pink dies, I'm gonna cry. Like and I started crying in the shower thinking about Pink being gone. But it doesn't mean that like I'm not gonna love this dog immensely right now. And I think that's everything that I've learned about life is like I'm gonna grieve hard when my people die and when my favorite dog dies and like when I don't have my people around. But what I can do is understand that like I lived with these people, I lived a life, I had these memories, and I'm gonna keep that, and that's gonna help me through my grief. It's not gonna mean that I'm not gonna be sad because sad is okay, but I'm going to take all this with me and I'm going to build a resilience and I'm going to understand that like this is something that happened and it's tragic, but I'm going to be able to still live. And that's one of the biggest things that I've learned is like it's not about telling people to get over it. It's about helping people build resilience, helping them keep moving on after this thing has happened to them because it's going to happen to every single person that we know. So being able to be like, okay, I'm going to process this and I'm going to keep going in my life with this grief. I'm going to
Mhm.
be able to handle this is the most important thing because the worst thing people can do is start to grieve and then have nowhere for this grief to go, no way to express it, and then just get deeper and deeper into their own personal depression. You know what I mean? That's what we don't want for anybody. Cuz this sucks, but like there's got to be a way to come. I never like to say come out or move on, but move forward and
Mhm.
keep going with the love that we had for this person or the complicated feelings we had for them, you
Right.
know? Yeah.
Right.
So
And
yeah.
it's even though it's huge and it's
Mhm.
final, it is one part of their life. It is just one part in time. And if we only focus on that, we're not honoring the other pieces of it, which can be, like you said, can be complicated. Do
Yeah.
you do you feel like you have to protect your energy, or is there a way that you sort of protect yourself as you're working through grief with other people and working through these, complex situations? Or do you
I
feel like you don't need to?
Oh no, I do. Because I definitely do. One thing I've learned, and it's been also through like nursing has helped me with this, is like I cannot take on everybody else's problems or everybody else's grief. Like I have my own problems and my own grief and my own things I'm working through. But I can be in the presence of somebody, and I think everybody can do this, and I think a lot of people do this without thinking. We have friends, we have people we love in our lives, but then we also have our own families. We can be with our friends and we can talk to them and we can cry with them for whatever it is, whether it's grief, whether they broke up with somebody, whether they're getting a divorce, whether whatever's happening. Um, but then we can go home and live our lives. And we can still love that person and when we're with them, we're present with them. But we have to go home and be your own person So I've just learned to like be able to like try to love on people and give them what I can when I'm with them. And then when I leave, I have to wash that off and realize like I have to go home to my people and my situation, um, and deal with that. So yeah, I just try to like give the love I can give and make sure that like I cut that when I'm not with them. I have to cut that off and be like, okay, cool. I'll see you when I see you or whatever, but now I have to go home to my people and be myself. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Hmm.
So there's three things that I ask every person that I
Hmm.
talk to. And the first is, what advice would you give to your younger self as it relates to death, whether it's pre-profession or even as you were starting this work?
Yeah. Okay, that's a good one. Don't assume is a big one. Don't assume anybody's situation or how they feel about anything. Um, oh, and don't judge how they feel. I try my best not to judge. I think I'm getting better at it. But I think when I was younger, I'd be like, oh, why is this person acting like this? Or why are they doing this? Like, that's not any of my business. Like, you know what I mean? People are going to deal with things the way they deal with it. And it has nothing to do with me. And just because I wouldn't deal with something that way doesn't mean that this person can't deal with it that way or this person can't feel this way. That's their own business. I'm not living their life. I'm not in their body. So that's the most important thing I would say to my younger self is just don't judge and don't make assumptions.
Yeah, that's probably great advice generally,
Yeah, yeah,
honestly.
yeah.
And then what do you love most about this work?
I love people realizing well, strong is, yeah, it is a good word that you used before, how strong they really are. Because when they're in the throes of grief, especially, people be like, I'm never gonna be okay. That's what people realize. I'm never gonna be all right. Like, I'm just gonna be like this forever. And seeing them start to realize, like, wait a minute, maybe I am gonna like be okay. Maybe I am gonna be able to wake up one morning and be like, you know what? I'm gonna get through my day today and I'm not gonna cry. Or I'm gonna get through my day and maybe I will cry, but it won't be for the whole day. It'll be for 5 minutes and then I'll go to the grocery store. And seeing them build that resilience in themselves and also seeing them be like, I can still love my person who's gone and be and just live. That's awesome. Like, and seeing them realize that, and you can't tell anybody that when they're in the throes of grief, obviously. But when they start to realize it and you see them start to blossom, it's so awesome, to see them just love and talk about their person and be able to like live and keep making life and experiences for themselves and their families. It's really, really cool to see.
I use the phrase pass on and
Hmm.
in relationship to death and the individual dying, but you're almost seeing that as well with individuals, right? Like they're passing
Yeah.
through it. And like you said, grief never goes away, but seeing how grief has now become part of their life in a healthy way, right?
Yes.
That's got to be incredible to watch. And anything that I missed that you might want to talk about or
I don't know. I talked a lot. You asked fantastic questions, and then I rambled.
no, no. Well, and this is such a fun conversation for me. And
Mhm.
as I was sort of telling friends that, who you were and what we were going to talk about today, we don't talk about it. Like it's just
No,
something that we don't talk about, which is sort of insane considering every single one of us is going to die and we don't know
it is.
when. Like we don't. But we do know it's going to happen. So it's sort of wild to think about it. And even with like a will. Like I have
Hmm.
a lot of parent friends who haven't gotten a will because they're like, it feels icky. And I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
but it's gonna happen. Like,
Yeah, exactly. And you want everything to be trust me, you want everything to be sorted. I think that it's interesting what you're saying. I think that our relation to death is because of our relation to wellness. I feel like that's a big part of it. We are so obsessed with being healthy and eating organically which is not bad. Don't get me wrong. All
sure.
that's great. Yeah, but like we are so obsessed with wellness now that like we're like, oh, we can fend off death. It's like, no, girl, we can't. Like we're never. Who said it? Benjamin Franklin. The two inevitable things in life are death and taxes. Yeah,
Got it.
like, we can't avoid it. So, and also, I think back in the day, wherever your family is from, it doesn't matter. There was war, there was famine, there was
Right.
disease, and there was such a proximity to it. It's like how many women back then had a baby and it was like 50-50, like if you're
Yep.
gonna make it, like
Yeah.
because nobody was washing their hands 300 years ago. So
Right.
yeah, so because of that kind of thing, it was so ever present that people talked about it all the time. But now we have so many wonderful advancements in science that we live longer, we don't have as many problems, it's not in our face. So while it's a good thing, it's also made us way more afraid of death because we're trying so hard not to do that. But again, it's inevitable, it's going to happen to us. And I think when we have a more kind of healthy relationship with it, healthy and at least that we acknowledge that it's a thing, it's it'll help us all, collectively.
It's interesting that you say that and how the proximity to death, right? And even birth, I didn't realize how dangerous birth was until I was pregnant. And
Yeah.
it's a big deal. Like, and I think it's because of those scientific, advances that we have that it's just like, oh, all you need to worry about is like getting diapers and
Yeah,
figuring out like
exactly.
if you work, like how you're going to do that or whatever, daycare.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, you can die.
Yeah.
Like even with all of these advances, like it's still
Dangerous.
dangerous. So it's
Yeah.
it's just interesting how like yes, science is wonderful, but it's also sort of like disconnected us. I even said that you're talking about wellness, and I'm like, yeah, like chicken comes from the grocery store, like not the
Yeah.
pharmacy. So we've gotten so disconnected from these parts of our lives that we used to be so connected to.
Exactly.
Well, this has been such an awesome conversation. Anytime you want to talk more about it, I am so in. And
Absolutely.
how can people find you?
Yeah, so I have a website if you ever want to check it out. It's called Sankofa Healing Sanctuary, .com. And you can go there, you can see stuff. If you have any questions for me, you can always ask. I'm open to answering anybody's questions about anything. Um, and I have a podcast called Dine with the Divine. I talk mostly about like mythology and storytelling on there, but we do have a couple episodes where we do focus on death. So you can always listen to me there, and those are the two best ways to come at me if you want to.
That's fantastic. And what does Sankofa refer to?
Oh, so Sankofa is actually a word from from the Akan people, which is where my family's from,
Mhm.
and it actually means to return and get it, which is kind of like a euphemism meaning to never forget where you come from. So that's kind of one of my favorite phrases.
Oh, I love that. Thanks for explaining that. We'll have all of your information on the website and on social media and all of that. This was really great. I have listened to your podcast. I think it's awesome.
Oh, thank
We
you.
could probably have another conversation about how storytelling is how we've learned how to deal with things like death and birth and creation and things like
Absolutely.
that. And it's like fascinating. But this has been really wonderful. Thanks for spending so much time with me today.
No problem. Thank you so much. This was so fun. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to Wait, What Do You Do Again? For more information about today's guest, or if you'd like to be on the show, please visit megdeford.com. See you next time.